Brothers and sisters, children and elders in Islam, picking up from where we left off yesterday, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this surah, Surah Tawbah, the chapter which does not begin with the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, only because it was revealed with thousands of angels as a whole chapter with the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This chapter was revealed clear-cut defining orders that the believers had to fulfill in light of the decades of trauma and persecution, exile. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses very harsh words in this surah, and it is all justified based on the timeline, the circumstances, and the entire history surrounding the close to 2 decades of Islam at that time. There's so much that we can speak about in this chapter, but in light of time, to kind of shed light on verse 28, إِنَّمَا الْمُشْرِكُونَ نَجَسٌ فَلَا يَقْرَبُوا الْمَسْجِدَ الْحَرَامَ بَعْدَ عَامِهِمْ هَذَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that the polytheists, the idolaters, are filthy. They are najas, impurity. فَلَا يَقْرَبُوا الْمَسْجِدَ الْحَرَامَ بَعْدَ عَامِهِمْ هَذَا. After this year, they will not be allowed in the vicinity of what is known as the haram. Haram means a sanctified territory. Now, to understand this, there's 2 very key lessons that we can take from this. Number 1 is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is purifying the vicinity of His house once more. That from the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam's reconstruction and re-erection of the Kaaba, it went from being a monotheistic practice back to it went from being a monotheistic practice, and it slowly evolved into culture and rituals that then incorporated idol worshipping and the lot until it became what I can describe as the mumbo jumbo that it became. Because not only did the Kaaba house idols, but the Kaaba stood alongside 2 huge idols. And in addition to the idols and the idol worshipping, the practices of ignorance such as circumambulating the Kaaba, doing tawaf naked, was one of the many practices that the people adopted over the passing of time. So the first lesson we're learning is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave a lot of time. Allah gave a lot of time for people to do what they were doing, and gave them then the opportunity through our Habib Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam to realign themselves with what is right and what is true. But after the 13 years of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam being in Mecca and then leaving to Medina and then coming back, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made this the moment where He said that this house will become the one house of the one Lord, and that all the idols and the idol worshippers, the mushrikeen, will have to leave. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in it placed a very important clause, بَعْدَ عَامِهِمْ هَذَا, after this year. Allah didn't say get out right now. Allah said they have till the end of the year to leave. It's so amazing that when something in Islam is so despised, if there's one thing in Islam that we cannot tolerate and Allah does not accept, is shirk, associating partners. It is the one sin Allah Himself states He will not forgive. Inna Allah la yaghfiru an yushraka bi. Allah will not forgive those who associate partners with Him. And here, His house is the home of worship of idols. And it didn't go on for just a few decades, it went on for hundreds of years. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, upon giving the opportunity and chance, and now handing Makkah over to the Muslims once more, is saying that the idolaters who want to continue on their path of their faith cannot do so after this year. They'll have to leave by the end of the year. There's such great wisdom in that, my fellow brothers and sisters. tolerance, patience, wisdom. If we are short-sighted and we become sporadic and angry because someone does something that's not right, someone's phone goes off in prayer, you could literally see they're going to be turning around. As soon as that second salam is done, they're going to be just, like eagle's eye. They're just going to come in on that person. How dare your phone goes off. If a kid's running around, they'll say, Kiska beta hai? Whose son is this? Whose child is this? But Tamiz, what's this person doing? And here's Allah, His house. And what's happening in His house, what's happening around His house. And with wisdom, with time, Allah gave opportunity. And when the time came to cut this relationship and sever it, Allah said, after this year, you have time to leave. And if you accept Islam and cease worshipping idols, you stay. This is your home. A second lesson that we take from this, my fellow Muslims, is the following. It's a lesson for myself first and foremost, and for all of us in our respective ways. Never assume that we'll get away with some wrong that we do. I could do something wrong and I could continue to do that wrong and I can make that wrong a habitual practice and I say, Allah's not catching me, I'm good to go. No. वो कहते हैं कि अल्लाह के यहाँ देर है अंधेर नहीं है. They say Allah, there is delay but there's no darkness. Meaning Allah will grab. And that rope that's tied us to our destiny will one day pull us back. So it's imperative to understand that we constantly keep ourselves in check. Ask ourselves, forget asking others, ask ourselves, am I doing the right thing, in the right place, at the right time, according to my capacity? I need to ask myself this question. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, before revealing this, before this verse in the surah, in verse 17, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elaborates why the idolaters can't stay. مَا كَانَ لِلْمُشْرِكِينَ أَن يَعْمُرُوا مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ شَاهِدِينَ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ بِالْكُفْرِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said it's not possible for the mushrikeen, the idolators, to continue upholding and frequenting the houses of Allah while in themselves they are witnesses of kufr. You can't run the houses of Allah if you have idols situated in your hearts and in your belief. That is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rooted them out, that they can't be there. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will protect His land. This is a testimony, this is backed by the prophecy and the words of our Habib Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The time is coming. Remember my words, brothers and sisters. The time is coming for Dajjal. And at that time, Dajjal will not enter Medina Munawwara, and Dajjal will not come to Makkah Mukarramah. But something will happen in Makkah Mukarramah. There will be 3 earthquakes, and all those who are not worthy of the protection of this sanctified land will run away from it. May Allah keep us under His protection at all times. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Moving on to today's recitation, where we're going to be going from the beginning of the 11th juz all the way to quarter way into the 12th juz. Surah Tawbah will be completing today, inshallah, Surah Yunus, and then we'll be entering into Surah Hud. There's so much here to unpack. The first is a story that the first verse of tonight's recitation will begin with. It's a continuation of a story of Ka'b ibn Malik. Ka'b ibn Malik was a Sahabi, a very dedicated Sahabi, who just once, he slacked off. Just once. He didn't go with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Tabuk. He's like, okay, I'm going to go. I'll go tomorrow. I'll go next week. And he didn't go. It's a long story. I'm confident you've heard it before. If not, Google Ka'b bin Malik's story tonight on your way home and listen to it. It's an amazing story. A Sahabi who had committed himself to Islam, one of the first. And now here, one of the first of the Ansar. And here he didn't go with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Tabuk. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asks about him as they're going. And one Sahabi says, he's too caught up with his money, because he was really rich at the time. That was like his prime. He was doing really good. And others rebuked him. How could you say something like that about Ka'b? Long story short, Rasulullah came back from the expedition. And as usual, those who didn't want to go, amongst whom are the hypocrites and others, they would come to Rasulullah and say, Ya Rasulullah, we were coming, but I got a stomach ache and this happened. And Rasulullah would pardon them. Okay, Allah forgive you, go. But there was 3 people who Rasulullah did not forgive or pardon, and he said, until Allah doesn't forgive you, I will not forgive you. One was Murara bin Rabi', one was Hilal bin Umayyah, and Ka'ab bin Malik. This story is a beautiful story. And it shows that how slipping once could become so costly. Yes, at the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgave them. وَعَلَى الثَّلَاثَةِ الَّذِينَ خُلِّفُوا. Allah talks about those 3 who stayed behind. Specifically those 3, not the rest of them. But Ka'ab bin Malik, he tells us this story, which in Bukhari Sharif, I think it's 5 pages long. It goes to show, my fellow Muslims, do not let go of any opportunity that comes your way to do good. Lest it not be that you will then remorse the loss of that opportunity and you will never be able to make it back. The Muslims were told to boycott them. Their families were told to boycott them. No one wanted to talk to them. They were strangers in their own town in Medina. What are we trying to pursue in this world, my fellow Muslims? We are trying to pursue Allah's pleasure. In a nutshell, we're trying to get Allah's pleasure. And we need to then adopt the ways of those who obtained Allah's pleasure. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defines who they are in verse 101. وَالسَّابِقُونَ الْأَوَّلُونَ مِنَ الْمُهَاجِرِينَ وَالْأَنصَارِ وَالَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوهُمْ بِإِحْسَانٍ. There's a hadith of there's a quote in a hadith that's quoted in the khutbahs. It used to be quoted a lot in the khutbahs. خَيْرُ الْقُرُونِ قَرْنِي ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُم. That the best era is my era, and then the one after them, and the one after them. So remember, we asked our teacher, this is not fair. Because if the best era was Rasulullah's era, and then the one after it, the tabi'een, and the tabi'een, like, we're so far away from it. How can it be that we're deprived from the best era? So he gave us an amazing answer. And this verse backs that. You see, those who were the first and pioneers in Islam, from the Muhajirin and the Ansar, they all received a certificate. Not a Harvard certificate or Yale certificate. They got a certificate of Allah's pleasure. Radiyallahu anhum. Allah is pleased with them. It's done. Allah's pleased. See, that's the certificate we need. Now, how can I ensure I get that certificate? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوهُمْ بِإِحْسَانٍ. Those who follow them in kind. So what our teacher told us was, if you're living in this era, but you're working like the people of that era, Allah will unite you with those people. And that's what this verse says. وَالَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوهُمْ بِإِحْسَانٍ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ وَرَضُوا عَنْهُ. Whoever follows the Sahaba, the Tabi'een, the Tabi'een, the 3 prime eras of Islam, they come under the certification of Allah's pleasure. But whoever resided in these prime eras, such as Abu Jahl or Abu Lahab, and they did not fit the criteria of that time, they've been extracted from that time. They've been extracted from the opportunity of that time. So we could be living in the final days of this world, but we are trying our best to emulate the Sahaba and those after them and those after them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant us His pleasure. Say Ameen. Allah will grant us His pleasure. That's the pleasure we are seeking. If Allah's happy with me, everything is right. If Allah's not happy with me, everything is wrong. So how can I make a step? How could I take a step in the direction to ensuring that I become amongst those noble people who have already obtained the certification of Allah's pleasure? Verse number 111 of this chapter tells us how. إِنَّ اللَّهَ اشْتَرَى مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ أَنفُسَهُمْ وَأَمْوَالَهُمْ بِأَنَّ لَهُمُ الْجَنَّةِ. If tonight you accept that I and my wealth, my belongings, my abilities no longer belong to me. Tonight they belong to Allah. Who does it belong to, everybody? I don't hear you all. Who does it belong to? Everything I own belongs to Allah. Because Allah Himself states that He has already purchased from the believers their lives and their wealth in exchange for Jannah. I.e., if we want to be those who obtain Jannah by gaining Allah's pleasure, tonight we have to accept that I don't belong to myself anymore. What I possess doesn't belong to me anymore. Rather, I have willingly given it to Allah. Allah has purchased it from me, and in return He's giving me Jannah, and that's all I care about. Allah has made that transaction with the believers. May Allah allow us to be those believers. Ameen. May Allah allow us to be of those believers who then fit the criteria of gaining His pleasure. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Jazakumullah khairan. Salatul Isha. Bismillah.